3 years ago, my wife Courtney and I, Kevin, seemed to be living for art. There was not a drop of pretentiousness in us, at least. I hope there was not. We just loved art of almost any type. Dutch cityscapes, primitive African sculptures, pre-Columbian masks, fantasies of Salvador and Dali. We really liked all this. Our house was decorated with the best works of art we could afford, and we visited art exhibitions and museums at least once a month, and usually once every 2 weeks. We were members of the circles of the two nearest art galleries and attended all the private exhibitions, vernissages, and gala evenings that they offered, and even went to New York and Washington for special exhibitions. We had many good friends who shared our interests. Although during the 8 years that Courtney and I were married, we had many other interests, albeit not as common as an interest in art, and other groups of friends. Our friends in the art community were the closest. In fact, with one exception, we would rather chat with our artist friends than with anyone else. The only exception is Tom's second wife, Katrina. I tried to please Katrina for Tom's sake. However, it was really difficult. She seemed uneducated, did not appreciate most classical works of art, including masters such as Monet and Van Gogh, and constantly made frivolous comments about works that other members of our group found fascinating. The members of our group had a lot of conversations about how Tom could get along with her, or put up with her lack of sophistication. However, there was one discussion that the male members of our group never discussed: why he married her. Katrina is hot, like a sultry tropical breeze on a cool winter day. Although her face is only slightly prettier than average, and she dresses relatively conservatively. However, at the time this story was just beginning, Tom's patience for its simplicity seemed to have run out, despite its passionate appearance. He repeatedly publicly criticized her, which led to some unpleasant situations that required my experience to resolve. I am a professional mediator and negotiator, and I really like to transfer my work experience into my personal life. However, when it came to Tom and Katrina, despite the fact that my stress relief actions always worked in the end, I never received any recognition, let alone gratitude, from any of them. Although the rest of our band members expressed appreciation, despite my concerns about Katrina, I was always nice to her, and she to me, in one-on-one situations. Although there were few such meetings, I had known Katrina for about 3 years when the impetus for writing this story arose. The largest local art gallery celebrated its 50th anniversary. It featured an exhibition of paintings by Jean Miro and rare lithographs collected from around the world, including the original of perhaps his most famous painting with the inappropriate title sculptures. This gallery was also famous for offering food and drinks at all the parties that had no equal, and this event promised to be the best in history. I was really looking forward to visiting him. About a week before the event, Katrina called Courtney. Apparently, she was in a tearful mood. Tom was going to leave town on business. The event was held on Wednesday evening, but for some reason Katrina really wanted to attend it. According to Courtney, Katrina struck her with the phrase, "I know that most of the members of your group think I'm a simpleton and a bore, but I'm trying my best to fit in, and you and Kevin are the most tolerant of them. Could I please give you two a ride?" "Ah, of course," Courtney replied, not knowing what to say. Obviously, this made Katrina very happy. "Ah, Kevin," Courtney told me shortly after with a shy expression on her face. It was Katrina. Tom will be out of town for the 50th anniversary celebration, and she wanted to give me a ride. I couldn't refuse her. Damn it, I muttered. I think I'm going to have to take some pills to calm myself down, or get really drunk, or maybe both. Don't be so gloomy. Courtney chuckled. She spoke well of us and said that she was trying her best to join the team and learn more about art. Myro should become an excellent teacher. Really? I asked cynically, raising an eyebrow. Behave yourself. Courtney laughed and poked me in the side. I was almost getting used to the idea that Courtney and I would take turns interacting with Katrina at the gala when another shoe fell a few days later. "Kevin, darling," Courtney exclaimed. Whenever she said, "darling," it meant that I wouldn't like what she was going to say next. "What?" I replied with a displeased look. "You know how much I want to go to the celebration, but something happened at work, and in order to develop my career, I just need to leave town from Wednesday morning until late Friday evening." "I'm really sorry," she said, stroking my chest with her finger. The first question popped into my head. "Is John Bates going on this trip?" I asked in an unpleasant voice. "Yes, along with two other people," was her awkward reply, as if to justify herself. However, she quickly pulled herself together and asked in a joking tone, although I didn't find it funny, "Why are you so worried about him all the time?" "Because, figuratively speaking, I hope not literally, but I'm not sure he's always sniffing your crotch. That's why," I replied decisively. "Oh, Kevin, You're getting it all wrong, really. Courtney. Then why is he always trying to slow dance with you at every event of your company? Well, the time we saw him and his supposed girlfriend at the Passion Fruit nightclub, how did he know we were going to be there? We've discussed this many times, she said, somewhat irritably. It was just a coincidence, and he also dances with other women, only fast dancing. And besides, I didn't like his comment last time when I told him that I was dancing slow dancing only with you. I grumbled. He was just joking, she snorted. I didn't find it funny. I retorted, oh, honey, don't be jealous. She cooed. You know you're much prettier than he is. I really thought I looked a lot better, and I knew I could kick his ass just by putting my hand behind his back. But I also knew that women in general, and Courtney in particular, don't treat looks the same as men. Her last boyfriend before we got married 7 years ago looked a lot like John, and she seemed to be in love with him until he foolishly dumped her and then unsuccessfully tried to get her back. Still offended, asked, did you really need to go on this trip? Yes, darling, you do. You can call Brad if you don't believe me, she replied soothingly, stroking my chest again. Brad is the CEO of her company in an honest man. I was muttering to myself when Courtney hugged me. Then a whole new problem popped up in my brain. I gently pushed Courtney to arm's length and blurted out, are you going to call Katrina and tell her she can't come with us because you're not coming? Why would I do that? Courtney asked after a short pause with a puzzled expression on her face. You're still walking, aren't you? She can still go with you. I was relying on you to take the pressure off me in solving her incomprehensible questions and behavior. Do I have to act alone now? I grumbled. Our other friends will be there. Be a gentleman, Kevin. Like I said, she's trying to change. Maybe it will be fun. Yes, most likely. I groaned. You take a sip of the bottle all the time, don't you? Courtney chuckled. Let me calm your frayed nerves, she continued, massaging my shoulders. I knew she was kidding me, but because I thought everything was going for the best, I agreed. When we fully recovered, I picked her up in my arms, took her to the shower, and, after much caressing, spinning and giggling, carried her to our bed. It was not so easy for me to fall asleep. I was still angry about her business trip with John and the fact that I had to deal with Katrina alone, since I was sure that our friends would hardly be able to help me. Eventually, I fell into a restless sleep. I was so worried that 2 days later I finally called Brad. I knew him pretty well from my work at the company and even played doubles tennis with him a couple of times when his regular partner couldn't come to tournaments at his country club. I tried not to be too nosy or conspicuous, and I think I mostly succeeded because I started the conversation by asking him if he knew how to get tickets to the next match of the local tennis club world team. He confirmed that Courtney really needed to go, but that only she and John would go, and no one else. However, this decision was made recently, so maybe she wasn't lying. I was still offended. I did my best to use Courtney to the point of insensibility on Tuesday night. Before her trip the next morning, she complained a little, but it sounded more like a joke than the truth. So I decided to suppress my anxiety about the fact that she and John were alone for 2 nights. Besides, now I'm faced with another disturbing situation. I took Katrina to the gala concert myself. I called Katrina around noon on Wednesday, hoping that I would have the opportunity to refuse to accompany her to the gala concert, although I planned to go anyway. But she was so excited about it that I would be a real idiot if I cancelled the meeting with her. I'm looking forward to seeing the Myro exhibit with someone who knows who won't constantly belittle me like Tom does, she blurted out at one point. I prepared for a difficult evening, but vowed to do my best. I was wearing a formal suit at the event, so I was wearing a tuxedo. When I picked Katrina up, she was wearing an elegant floor-length electric blue dress, strapless, sleeveless, with an open back and open shoulders, with a slit almost to the thigh on the left side. She wore a bright sapphire necklace around her neck and a discreet sapphire bracelet on her left wrist. You look great, I said honestly, helping her put pashmina on her shoulders to go to the gallery. Thanks. You're the most beautiful penguin I've ever seen, she grinned back. The small talk on the way to the gallery was a bit strained, but once we got there, ate some oysters, shrimp, and vegetables, and drank 2 generous glasses of wine, our conversation flowed much more smoothly. When we visited the Myro exhibition, Katrina bombarded us with questions and comments. Katrina was not particularly impressed by Kolo's, Myro's early work. When Myro was a young artist, he was influenced by the realism of Dutch masters. Appreciate the attention he pays to the objects here, because this will be reflected in his later works, where he creates clear, biomorphic forms in his signature style. I explained to Katrina when we were considering this, trying to show as little pomposity as possible. In my opinion, it is a bad still life, Katrina grinned, finishing her second glass of white wine. Red is not served in galleries. I might need another glass if they all look like this, she chuckled, holding out her glass. The way she said it was actually funny, and since I don't like his either, I smiled back and brought her another glass. When I caught up with her, she was thoughtfully watching a beautiful bird opening up the unknown to a couple of lovers. Thank you, Kevin, she blurted out, her gaze lingering on my hand for a long time as she carefully took the glass from my hand. It's a really stressful job. I can't fully understand why everything is happening like this, she said. More sophisticated patrons than me, I replied cheerfully, believe that in this work, Miro used a solid background, emphasizing simplified shapes and lines, which together mimic the appearance of a complex constellation in the night sky. Some believe that at the time he painted this painting, the atmosphere of crowds and chaos echoed Miro's own feelings about the violent upheavals in Europe at that time. He wrote it when he and his family were fleeing the Nazis. Holy shit. Katrina giggled. She remained in thought for a while, and then noticed. I see it. Thank you. Kevin, you're a fucking genius. I laughed. I'll just take genius. I don't need a damn superlative degree. She hugged me sincerely and naturally. In fact, I had a good time playing the role of a tour guide for Katrina while we looked at the rest of the collection. Instead of being silly or donkey-like, most of her comments were humorous or thoughtful, and some were even insightful. And this is despite the fact that I generously poured her a fourth glass of wine. Katrina's best comments were left for last about Miro's composition called Motherhood. Is it really a woman? Katrina giggled after looking at the work for a couple of minutes, finishing her fourth glass of wine. Yes, it is. I grinned. Obviously, this is very schematic and reduced to the simplest form. I think she has pretty breasts, even if she's anorexic. Katrina smirked. But I have to say I could show you some of the art in my house that's much more aesthetic. They say that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. I quoted. Yes, but the work of art that I can show you in my house is, in your opinion, much more beautiful and spectacular than anything in this collection. She grinned. We met with some of our friends. We had a very pleasant conversation in which Katrina enthusiastically took part and winked at me every time she repeated one of my remarks. By 2130, everything began to disperse. Katrina went to powder her nose and I, secluded in a niche called Courtney on her cell phone. The use of cell phones in the gallery is frowned upon, if not explicitly prohibited, so I had to stay in a secluded, inaccessible place. Well, at least I tried to call Courtney. My call was immediately forwarded to voicemail. I left a cheery message telling her that the evening was actually fun, and not the total failure I feared, and asked her to call me at any time. On the way home, it became clear that Katrina was inadequate, although she was also clearly not so drunk that she could not control her feelings. I was quite surprised by one of her early comments on the way. I may not have told you this before, Kevin, but I really have to thank you for all the times you helped me out of awkward situations when Tom made humiliating comments. I really appreciate it, she said, squeezing my bicep when she was done. I hoped I was helpful, I muttered, slightly taken aback by the sincerity of her remark. She continued earnestly. I also have to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being so kind to me tonight. I bet you've been waiting for this with trepidation, but I hope it wasn't too terrible for you. Ken, I stumbled a bit when I replied. Actually, I had fun tonight. I hope you had a nice time. At that moment, the bright lights of a passing car reflected off her azure eyes and sapphire necklace at the same time. A truly exotic sight. I had a wonderful time, she cooed, readily showing off her pearly whites. When we got to her house, she took my right hand and asked casually, would you like to see what works of art I have at home that, in the opinion of almost anyone, deserve more praise than Myro's motherhood? It was a little after 2,200 hours, and I never went to bed before midnight, even on weekdays. Of course, I replied, let me open the door for you. I hurried to the passenger side of the car and opened the door for Katrina, gently taking her hand to make it easier for her to get out of the car. The parts of her dress outlining the slit parted, revealing her left thigh, which was even more desirable than what I had gleaned from earlier subtle examinations of her body. I helped her with the keys. She closed the curtains in her living room and excused herself. I have to make a stop before I show you the works of art that I'm so proud of. She smiled. Can I get you something to drink? I think I've had enough at the party, I replied. I have to go home anyway. Oh, don't worry. You'll be completely sober by then, if you change your mind. The bar is over there, she said, pointing to a small bar between the living room and the kitchen. I'll be back soon, she said, and disappeared somewhere in the depths of the first floor. I walked around the living room, looking at the paintings on the walls, and made another call to Courtney's cell phone. He switched back to voicemail. I left a short message. Call me back. I was a little confused, but shrugged my shoulders and continued to look at the compositions on the walls. I had only been to Tom's house once before when he was married to his first wife. It seemed to me that most of the work has changed since then. I liked some of them, but none of them were good enough to delight me, and certainly there was nothing much more beautiful and dramatic than Myro's work. As Katrina promised in the gallery, she's probably taking a painting or sculpture from her bedroom. It occurred to me by chance as I continued to look at the paintings on the walls of the living room. Then I heard a noise to my left. I turned around just as Katrina entered the living room, smiling. She was wearing the same high heels, a sapphire necklace, and a sapphire ankle bracelet and nothing else. I was lucky that I didn't pick up a drink at the bar, because I would have dropped it for sure. Now tell me honestly, is Kevin a work of art? Is it more beautiful and dramatic than anything you've seen in marble or on canvas? She asked rhetorically, defiantly moving her arms, and at the same time smoothly turning 360 degrees. I was stunned, speechless and stunned by what I saw. There was no doubt that Katrina's body was the best I had ever seen in person or in the media. When Katrina took a pose, putting one foot in front of the other, slightly bending her knees and putting her hands on her hips, she grinned. Well, what do you think about my work? Better than anything in the gallery. I think I muttered something like, hell yeah. But since my circuits were overloaded at the time, I'm not really sure. You can be sure of one thing. It's a lot more fun than anything you've ever encountered before. She giggled, heading towards me. When she had walked a couple of meters, her smile became even more smug. I suppose that means you really like what you see, art lover. She giggled. To be honest, I don't quite understand how what happened next happened, and I also don't know what was in my head. Was it something other than animal desire? I do not know if I was thinking about Courtney or why my calls were being forwarded to voicemail. I don't know if images of Tom flashed through my mind. I got up from my knees and very carefully took off my clothes, looking at the most beautiful piece of art I have ever seen. I obeyed. I made her comfortable on the couch, completely immersed myself in her in one motion, and put her heels on my shoulders. It was obvious that she was doing casual exercises regularly. After we came to our senses, we went to bed, although we didn't get a damn lot of sleep. After a wonderful breakfast at 9 a.m., consisting of blueberry pancakes and sausage pies, which Katrina cooked and served on the table, my brain started working again for the first time since the end of the gala concert. A lot of thoughts were spinning in my head. For example, Courtney never told me how lucky Tom was, but why didn't he appreciate the unsurpassed work of art in front of me? Out how I could have the best experience of my life, a light year away with someone I used to have a naked feeling about. If I didn't have an important mediation starting at 11 a.m., and given the need to go home and change into my tuxedo, I'd stay all morning. Katrina, could you have dinner with me tonight? I think we need to discuss something, I said, getting up from the table. Now my stomach was satisfied almost as much as my libido. I can cook us dinner here, she said with a smile. Let me take you somewhere. When is your day off? You got me, she laughed, and I have a flexible schedule. So I'm taking the day off. How about 6 o'clock in the evening? I asked. Then pick me up, she giggled. I hope you can stay the night again. That's one of the topics we're going to talk about. I smiled. Courtney finally, very awkwardly, called me on my cell phone around 10:50 a.m., just as I was getting ready to start the mediation I was conducting. I told her I couldn't talk, but I didn't ask why she hadn't called me the night before, which seemed to calm her down somewhat. I asked her to call me in the evening. Despite the lack of sleep, I was very good at mediation. Perhaps it was because of the testosterone and endorphins that were still bubbling in my body. I successfully made a deal that both sides could come to terms with by 4 p.m., and even managed to take a hot shower and take an hour's nap before picking up Katrina. When I picked Katrina up, she was wearing a yellow sundress that seemed to have been made especially for her. She was in high spirits and put her arm around my shoulders as we walked to the car. As we drove up to the restaurant, she giggled. At dinner, we talked about anything but art. I was surprised at how well she understood music, tennis, and hockey. She was a child prodigy violinist, but her career was cut short due to a serious injury she sustained playing women's hockey when she was a teenager. When she recovered, she learned to play the piano, but gave up any aspirations for a professional music career. In college, she became interested in organizing events and was now making great strides. When we got back to her house, she squeezed my hand tightly as I walked her to the door. We have a lot more to talk about that we couldn't talk about in the restaurant. She smiled. Then she laughed and continued. Come into my living room, the spider said to the fly. When we entered her living room, she sat down next to me on the sofa and took my hands. Kevin, I have to confess, I seduced you. I've wanted this for a long time, but I didn't have the opportunity until last night. Let me be completely honest. I want to get rid of Tom, and I want you, especially after last night, when you shook my world like no one else has ever shaken it. She stunned me once again. I didn't know if my feelings for her, which had changed 180 degrees in a day, were real or stable, but I wanted to find out. Can you take a day off from work tomorrow? I asked. I'll do it if you want. She chuckled. Let's do another 24-hour compatibility check, I said. That night we made love. We also spent hours exploring each other's bodies, identifying erogenous zones, some of which we didn't even know existed. On Friday afternoon, we held a dress rehearsal for the concert, and it became obvious that I was a beginner in music and Katrina was an expert. My phone was on the whole time. Courtney never called. When Katrina and I broke up late on Friday evening, I said, I have a lot to think about. What about you? I should have pretended to be at least a little touchy. She chuckled. But I don't have anything to think about. I just need a way to find out what you think about it. When I got home early Friday night, Courtney was already there. She had an expression on her face that I couldn't quite decipher. Something between thoughtfulness, bewilderment, and fear. Where have you been, darling? What is it? She asked. At Katrina's house. Oh, why? I think she wants to end her marriage with Tom. Have you talked to her about this? Yes, by the way, I still haven't heard from you about your trip. Were there any problems? Oh, well, we've just been very busy. I'm sorry. But it went really well. We got the contract we were hoping for. So I'm sure Brad will be happy. Listen, maybe we need to talk about something. You're right. But let's put it off until tomorrow. We spent the rest of the evening chatting over dinner, watching a movie on Netflix, and then when we went to bed, we made love with a passion I could never remember. The contrast between making love with Courtney and the way he was with Katrina couldn't be more striking. On Saturday morning, I went for a 50-kilometer bike ride while Courtney went to her fitness club. We met at home for lunch, took a shower, and then sat down together. Oh, expensive. While I was away, something happened. She began. Yes, of course. I giggled. The next 4 months were not pleasant, but at least Katrina and I were never more determined than we were at that time. Courtney and Tom seemed to hesitate between trying to mend their relationship and breaking up their marriages. But Katrina and I put an end to their hesitation by renting an apartment and moving in 6 weeks later. As soon as the divorces were finalized and Courtney and Tom bought out our shares in the houses, Katrina and I bought a house together and got married soon after. I don't know about Courtney and Tom, but I've never looked back. Now, 3 years after the gala, I'm still living the dream. Every night I snuggle up to a living, breathing, perfect work of art, and I couldn't be happier. And